Are you ready to learn the truth about the most closely guarded architectural secret of the 19th century? Something completely unimaginable and even strange to modern people was happening in the luxurious homes of that time. The owners of wealthy mansions deliberately spent huge fortunes and hired the best engineers just to hide the place where food was prepared as far away from the reception rooms as possible. It was a real obsession with distance that dictated the rules for the construction of entire neighborhoods and country estates. Designers created complex labyrinths of corridors to break any visible connection between the master's recreation area and the servants' work areas. Life there was full of hustle and bustle, loud shouts from cooks, and the endless clanging of heavy copper pots and pans. The owners of the house sought to create the illusion of perfect order and silence, where food appeared on the table as if by magic. This required not only thick walls, but also hundreds of meters of corridors separating two completely different worlds within the same building. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how Victorian architects masterfully isolated the owners from the unbearable noise, thick smells, and exhausting heat of huge kitchen stoves. We will show you the hidden mechanisms and secret doors that allowed the huge staff of servants to remain completely invisible to the aristocracy. You will see the tricks that builders of the past used to preserve the peace of the lords at the expense of the comfort of those who prepared their meals. What if I told you that everything you believed was not true? We are used to thinking of the hearth as the heart of the home and the main source of pleasant family warmth. In Victorian England, the cooking area was a veritable industrial workshop, hidden from prying eyes. The owners of wealthy estates were terrified of the smell of fried onions or stewed vegetables entering their elegant living rooms. The smell of food was considered bad form and immediately revealed the undesirable presence of servants in the noble part of the building. Architects were tasked with designing buildings that provided the strictest aromatic isolation of all work areas. The process of preparing complex dishes that took hours to cook was inevitably accompanied by thick steam and soot. The heavy smells of cooking could easily spoil the refined atmosphere of a dinner party. Homeowners demanded the complete absence of cooking aromas in their living rooms. Any accidental gust of air from the work area was considered a completely unacceptable occurrence. The air in the reception rooms had to smell exclusively of expensive perfumes and polished wood. The space was regularly decorated with fresh flowers to maintain an atmosphere of absolute natural freshness. Heavy velvet curtains and carpets easily absorbed any foreign odors from the lower corridors. Cleaning such expensive fabrics from ingrained kitchen fumes was a virtually impossible task. That is why work areas were always moved as far away as possible. The culinary processes of that time were radically different from modern cooking methods. The lack of powerful electric hoods meant that one had to rely solely on natural draft and architectural barriers. Thick vapors from boiling broths slowly rose to the high vaulted ceilings of the work areas. The air below always remained heavy, humid, and saturated with tiny particles of fat. These particles settled on all available surfaces, creating a sticky film on the stone walls. The owners of the estates were well aware of the physical properties of warm air and its ability to spread throughout the building. They ordered solid partitions to be built to block any possible air currents. Ventilation shafts were designed so that the wind would carry smoke away from the bedroom windows. Massive doors served as a reliable shield, blocking the aromas of the feast being prepared. Keeping the air clean became a real obsession for the entire high society of the time. The hard work of the cooks was accompanied by the constant boiling of huge amounts of water for washing dishes. This process added even more humidity and specific household odors to the atmosphere. Laundry and dishwashing rooms were located in close proximity to the main kitchen stoves. This entire production complex generated a continuous stream of steam throughout the long day. Architectural isolation of this humid cloud required enormous engineering efforts in the design of each new house. The smells of spices delivered from distant colonies were strong and incredibly persistent. The use of huge amounts of garlic, vinegar, and hot spices made the air in the kitchen very thick. Such aggressive aromas could cause strong dissatisfaction among sensitive guests during a social reception. Servants were strictly forbidden to open interior doors when spices were being added to boiling pots. Strict control of airflows was an integral part of the daily routine of the house manager. The aromatic boundary between the two worlds was invisible, but incredibly strong and insurmountable. Crossing the invisible line, a person was instantly transported from a world of refined luxury to an area of hard physical labor.
My lords, ladies, dinner is served.
This sharp transition was felt with every step along the long, winding corridors of the old estates. The architecture literally dictated the rules of perception of space through the sense of smell of everyone inside. Smell served as a reliable indicator of social status and clearly defined the place of each inhabitant of the house. The sensory division of the huge building reached incredible proportions in every rich Victorian mansion. The owners enjoyed perfect fresh air in their bright and spacious halls all year round. At the same time, hard work was going on downstairs among the hot stoves and sooty stone walls. The contrast between these two worlds was striking and largely determined the entire way of life at that time. We would be very interested to hear your views on this division of comfort, so please write about it in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to our channel to regularly discover new and fascinating historical facts.
Watch where you're going with those crates. We need that clear.
What happens in the shadows of these huge mansions amazes even sophisticated modern architects. The main method of combating kitchen inconveniences was to physically remove the work area as far as possible from the formal dining room. Designers created endlessly long, confusing corridors that curved at unpredictable right angles. Such complex labyrinths served as effective natural barriers to the flow of warm kitchen air. The kitchen was often moved to a completely separate wing of the building or descended into a deep, damp semi-basement. Horizontal separation was the most popular solution in the construction of country estates. The working block could be located hundreds of feet away from the main residential building. These two spaces were connected only by a narrow enclosed passageway, through which numerous servants constantly shuttled. The long passage served as a kind of buffer in which all unwanted sounds and smells were completely absorbed. Every additional meter of this corridor guaranteed the owners absolute peace and quiet in their private quarters. If the house was built in a dense urban area, architects used the principle of vertical division of space. Kitchen areas were sunk deep underground, forming a whole labyrinth of dark basement rooms. Stone vaults reliably kept heat and odors downstairs, preventing them from rising to the living quarters. Steep, narrow staircases became the only means of communication between the light upper floors and the dark lower floors. These stone steps were climbed hundreds of times a day by workers carrying heavy loads. The floors in such service corridors were always laid with rough stone or durable brick tiles. This material was durable, easy to clean, and could withstand the constant movement of heavily loaded carts. However, the stone surface was incredibly cold and hard on the feet of workers who spent all day on their feet. The echo of footsteps on the hard floor was reflected many times from the bare brick walls of the narrow passageway. That is why service passages were always designed away from the walls of the main bedrooms and living rooms. The absence of daylight was a characteristic feature of most underground, connecting corridors of the Victorian era. The space was lit only by the dim flicker of oil lamps or a few gas horns. The gloomy atmosphere of these passageways contrasted sharply with the sun-drenched ceremonial halls of the upper floors. Employees were forced to navigate this semi-darkness while carrying fragile dishes and trays of food. The dark labyrinths became a symbol of the hidden, invisible life of the huge working mechanism of the estate. The scale of some architectural projects of that time is striking in its excessive grandeur and complexity. In the largest palaces, the length of service routes could be miles of confusing paths. New employees could easily get lost in this network of passages during their first weeks of service. Maps of the underground passages were known only to senior managers who coordinated the movement of the huge staff. These hidden arteries ensured the smooth functioning of the entire huge architectural organism. The physical strain on the staff due to such enormous distances was simply colossal. Moving heavy boilers, buckets of coal, and mountains of dishes required tremendous endurance and physical strength. Servants walked dozens of kilometers in a single shift without leaving the confines of one large building. The architects did not think about the ergonomics of work at all, prioritizing only the comfort of the owners. The layout of the house was a clear reflection of the rigid hierarchy of Victorian class society. The physical distance between the head chef and the dining lord was an incredible number of confusing passages. The servants had to cover these marathon distances dozens of times during a single formal evening.
Hurry, they are waiting for the roast.
The stone floors of the cellars quickly wore out the shoes of the workers during their endless sprints. The architectural grandeur of the estates amazed guests and made life incredibly difficult for all the hired workers. But how did hot dishes cover such vast distances without cooling down on their way to the master's table?
Observe the counterweights, Mr. Brunel. The ascent...
Guess how long it took to create this amazing architectural marvel inside the thick walls? To solve the complex problem of food cooling down, engineers incorporated a system of hidden mechanical lifts into the architecture of the houses.
A triumph of British engineering. Indeed, sir.
These wooden cabins moved inside dark stone shafts using a system of sturdy ropes and counterweights. Servants below placed plates on the elevator shelves and pulled hard on a thick hemp rope. The dishes rose silently to the top floor, where they were quickly intercepted by footmen in snow-white gloves. The manual elevator system was a real lifesaver for the huge multi-story city mansions of the time. The cabins were designed in different sizes to carry huge trays, bottles of wine, and clean dishes. The mechanism operated solely on the physical strength of the operator and a system of balanced cast iron weights. The movement of the cabin inside the shaft had to be as smooth as possible so as not to spill soups and sauces. The correct distribution of weight on the shelves required a certain amount of experience and great care from the workers. The elevator shafts were lined with a thick layer of brick to ensure reliable sound insulation and fire safety. In the event of a fire in the kitchen, these narrow vertical pipes could easily turn into dangerous chimneys. Therefore, massive iron dampers were installed on each floor to block the draft in an emergency. The inner surfaces of the shafts were regularly cleaned of accumulated dust and grease by chimney sweeps. The safety of this hidden mechanism was no less important than its practical effectiveness in everyday life. In some particularly large country estates, engineers went even further in their mechanical inventions. They laid real underground tunnels connecting the detached kitchen with the main dining room. Inside these long, damp tunnels, narrow-gauge rails were installed for the movement of special food trolleys. Workers pushed these heavy metal carts through the darkness, delivering dozens of hot dishes at once. Such an underground railway made it possible to serve grand banquets for hundreds of guests. The mechanization of the food delivery process required precise coordination between the upper and lower levels of the building. A system of speaking tubes allowed the chef to inform the waiters on the main floor when the dishes were ready. A loud whistle from a copper pipe served as a signal to start the lifting wheel at the bottom. This coordinated work resembled the actions of a large ship's crew during a complex maneuver. Any delay or mistake could have catastrophic consequences for the perfect dinner party. The design of lifts was constantly improved throughout the Victorian era thanks to advances in mechanics. Special braking systems were introduced to prevent heavily loaded cabins from falling suddenly. Wooden gears were replaced with reliable factory-made brass and steel parts. The cables were impregnated with special compounds to protect them from moisture and prevent rapid wear. The reliability of the hidden mechanisms became a source of pride for many owners of advanced country mansions.
Record that in the ledger.
Yes, sir.
Those coming out of the elevator always disguised themselves in a special pantry adjoining the main dining room. Guests never saw the mechanisms themselves and never heard the creaking of the taut ropes in the walls. Food appeared as if by magic from behind the closed doors of the pantry in perfect condition. This illusion of absolute ease of living was the main goal of this complex engineering system. The mechanics served only as an invisible tool to maintain the facade of an impeccable aristocratic lifestyle. Maintaining such hidden systems required the constant presence of a qualified mechanic among the staff. This person was responsible for lubricating bearings, replacing worn ropes, and adjusting heavy counterweights. A breakdown of the dumbwaiter just before an important reception was considered a real disaster for the entire household. In such cases, the servants had to run up steep emergency stairs carrying heavy trays. Regular maintenance of the mechanisms was the key to the peace of mind and confidence of the estate manager. Complex systems of metal blocks and strong cables required regular maintenance and constant technical care. Workers regularly descended into narrow, dark shafts to check the correct tension of all load-bearing ropes. Are you ready for the shocking truth about the extreme temperatures that prevailed in these workrooms? At the heart of the entire cooking unit was a massive cast iron stove, constantly fueled by high-quality coal. This huge dark metal monster weighed several hundred kilograms and took up almost an entire wall of the room. The fire in the internal furnaces was kept burning around the clock, heating the heavy cast iron surfaces to incredible temperatures. The heat in the enclosed space was so unbearable that it was impossible to stay there without preparation. The process of lighting and maintaining the fire in such huge furnaces required heavy, continuous physical labor. Every early morning began with a thorough cleaning of the heavy cast iron grates from the ash that had accumulated overnight. Huge buckets of dirty coal were carried from the basement storage rooms up steep stairs to the kitchen. When lit, the coal gave off acrid, thick smoke that filled the entire space up to the ceiling. The workers breathed this coal dust every day as they performed their heavy and harmful duties. The massive structure of the oven was designed to perform many different culinary tasks at the same time. Heavy copper pots of water boiled on the top plate, and numerous sauces simmered in pots. Inside the hot ovens, bread was slowly baked, and complex multi-tiered pies were prepared. An open fire was used to roast meat on special spits in front of the hot grates of the furnace. This entire system generated a fantastic amount of radiant heat into the room. Cooling the room during the summer months was an absolutely unsolvable problem for the architects of the time. Even small windows thrown wide open could not cope with the heat flow from the giant furnace. The air temperature near the stove could exceed all conceivable limits of human comfort. Cooks drank water by the liter, trying to compensate for the enormous loss of fluids in this fiery hell. Summer became the most dreaded season for every worker on the lower floors of the Old English mansion. Cleaning and polishing the huge cast iron facade of the stove was a mandatory daily and very dirty procedure. As soon as the metal cooled down a little in the middle of the night, it was thoroughly rubbed with a special black paste. This paste protected the cast iron from rust and gave it a noble dark shine by early morning. The polishing process required enormous physical effort and took several hours of hard manual labor. The coal dirt stuck to the workers' hands so badly that it was almost impossible to wash off. The heat capacity of the huge array of stone and metal allowed the furnace to remain hot even after the flames had been extinguished. This property was actively used for drying numerous towels and damp work clothes at night. The brick walls around the work area heated up so much that they gave off heat for days. This constant high temperature created a completely unique microclimate in the lower part of the large building. The heat from the furnace was invisible, but it was the most noticeable element of the entire enclosed kitchen atmosphere. The red-hot metal of the huge ovens radiated constant heat, permeating the stone walls deep inside. Workers languished in the incredible stuffiness of these enclosed spaces for long hours during their shifts. The owners of the house enjoyed the pleasant coolness of their spacious halls, completely oblivious to the basement. Coal stoves ensured uninterrupted cooking, but made the cooks' lives a severe ordeal. In the next chapter, you will learn how architects masterfully dealt with the terrible daily clatter of dishes.
Where is the fish course?
Coming, chef. Just plating it now.
The process of preparing complex multi-course meals was inevitably accompanied by a constant loud metallic clanging. Dozens of massive copper pots, heavy cast iron pans, and iron baking sheets were constantly being moved across surfaces. The tapping of sharp knives on thick wooden cutting boards merged into a single continuous working rhythm. The head chef loudly gave orders to his numerous assistants through the hum of the hot coal stove. All this cacophony of sounds created an incredible level of noise in the enclosed space of the stone room. The owners of luxurious mansions demanded absolute silence during their leisurely meals and social conversations. The clatter of dishes or the loud voices of servants were considered a gross violation of the rules of high Victorian etiquette. The sounds of work reminded guests that their comfort was provided by the hard labor of hired workers. Architects were given strict instructions to calculate the thickness of the floors to completely block any sound waves. Creating perfect acoustic insulation became one of the main challenges for engineers of the time. The massive stone arches of the basement served as an excellent natural soundproofing material for the entire house. Meter-thick walls of dense brick reliably absorbed the low-frequency hum of huge kitchen stoves and boilers. However, the main problem remained the propagation of sound through ventilation shafts and long service corridors. To solve this problem, double rows of heavy oak doors were installed on each staircase. This system of airlocks effectively dampened even the loudest shouts and the clanging of falling metal utensils. The system for summoning servants was also carefully designed to meet the strict requirements for silence in the halls. All the formal rooms were fitted with elegant handles connected by hidden wires to the basement rooms. The kitchen had a bunch of copper bells attached to special springy metal springs. The sharp ringing of these bells meant that a worker had to go to a certain room upstairs right away. The owners themselves never heard this piercing ringing because they were totally soundproofed. The wooden floors in the reception rooms were often covered with thick woolen carpets to muffle the sound of footsteps. At the same time, servants were strictly forbidden to wear shoes with hard horseshoes or to click their heels loudly. Movement through the hidden corridors had to be as quick as possible, but at the same time absolutely silent. Violation of the rules of silence could lead to immediate dismissal, even for the most experienced and valuable employee. Silence became a kind of symbol of high-quality service and professionalism of the entire household staff. The soundproofing properties of the long corridors were enhanced by the complex geometry of broken lines and turns. Sound waves were reflected multiple times off the walls, gradually losing their initial strength and intensity. The designers deliberately avoided direct passageways from the work areas to the main staircases of the mansion. Every architectural detail worked to create the perfect barrier between the bustling production area and the relaxation area. As a result of this painstaking work, the upper rooms were filled with absolute, almost unnatural calm. Even the process of delivering coal and firewood was organized to minimize any possible noise. The external coal hatches always opened onto the backyard, as far away as possible from the windows of the guest bedrooms. Wagons with supplies arrived only at strictly defined morning hours, when the owners were still fast asleep. Heavy barrels and boxes were unloaded onto special wooden platforms that softened the impact on the stones. The logistics of the entire estate were subordinated to one goal: preserving the serene silence for its owners. Inside the kitchen itself, the acoustics were simply appalling due to the bare brick walls and stone floors. The echo amplified every blow of the ladle against the edge of the huge copper cauldron or the clang of the falling lid. Workers often suffered from headaches due to this constant noise pressure throughout their shifts. They were forced to shout loudly to hear each other through this continuous industrial hum. This contrast between the deafening lower floors and the silent upper floors was striking to any outside observer. Interestingly, architects sometimes used acoustic pipes for communication between floors of a mansion. A cook could put his ear to a special copper funnel in the wall to hear orders from the dining room. The sound was transmitted through a long, hollow metal tube embedded deep in the brickwork of the building. This simplest form of internal communication allowed the serving of meals to be coordinated without running up and down long staircases. But even this communication tool was used extremely rarely so as not to break the general rule of absolute silence.
The roast is quite superb today, don't you?
This is what really happens behind the closed doors of the luxurious old dining rooms of Victorian estates. In addition to blocking sounds and smells, the owners of the houses categorically did not want to see the workers themselves. The visual isolation of all work processes was elevated to the rank of the strictest architectural and social law. The entrances to the long service rooms were cleverly disguised as tall bookcases or carved panels. A guest could walk down the entire bright corridor and not even notice the hidden door to the service area. The famous doors, covered with thick green cloth, became the main symbol of this harsh visual division. The green woolen fabric not only absorbed sound well, but also clearly marked the boundary between worlds. Behind these inconspicuous doors, a completely different reality began, full of dark corridors and hustle and bustle. Ordinary workers were strictly forbidden to go beyond this green border without direct orders. The visual boundary was maintained through strict discipline and a clear set of rules of conduct for staff. The system of hidden movement required the design of separate secret staircases for all domestic staff. These staircases were usually very narrow, steep, and completely devoid of natural daylight. They were built into thick interior walls or placed in dark, unlit corners of the huge building. Servants moved along these dark vertical arteries, carrying clean towels, hot water, and firewood. The owners could live in the house for many years without ever looking at these steep service stairs. The windows of the kitchen block were always designed so that they could not be seen from the main avenues of the park. They were either located below ground level in deep pits or opened onto an internal blind courtyard. The inhabitants of the house were not supposed to see maids or kitchen assistants bustling about with buckets from their windows. The exterior facade of the building had to radiate absolute calm and architectural symmetry from all sides. All the utility areas were carefully hidden behind high brick walls and thick hedges. The process of serving food in the main dining room was also organized according to the principle of maximum visual isolation. Dishes were never brought directly from the long, dark corridor into view of the noble guests.
The sauce complements it perfectly.
First, they were taken to a special bright buffet room adjacent to the ceremonial hall. There, the head butler and footman transferred the food to beautiful silver trays and added the finishing touches. Only then were the doors ceremoniously opened and the impeccable servants entered the dining area. Lower-level employees who did the dirty, rough work never went upstairs at all. Dishwashers, vegetable cleaners, and stokers remained eternal, invisible prisoners of their dark dungeons. Their faces and names were often unknown, even to the owners of the grand Victorian country residences. They were merely cogs in a huge, invisible mechanism that ensured the perfect comfort of high society. Such strict visual isolation allowed the owners to maintain the illusion of living in a beautiful fairy tale castle. A system of secret passages allowed the huge house to function completely unnoticed by its owners. Perfectly clean rooms appeared by themselves without any visible effort on the part of the relaxing gentleman. Workers moved along their hidden narrow routes quickly and absolutely silently around the clock. The visual separation emphasized the huge social gap between the inhabitants of one large building. In the next chapter, you will learn how architects coped with air purification in these closed stone bags.
Pressure is critical on boiler 4.
The problem of providing fresh air to workspaces was incredibly acute for engineers of the time. Huge coal furnaces consumed enormous amounts of oxygen every hour to maintain strong open combustion. The lack of a normal air supply could lead to rapid smoke filling the entire basement space. Therefore, architects created complex natural ventilation systems based on simple laws of physics. They masterfully controlled airflows, forcing them to move in strictly defined directions through the building.
A remarkable improvement indeed.
The ceilings in the kitchen blocks were designed to be as high as possible, sometimes reaching the height of 2 ordinary floors. This huge architectural volume served as a kind of reservoir for collecting rising, thick steam and smoke. Under the ceiling, there were special rows of narrow windows that could be opened with long poles. Through these high openings, hot, polluted air naturally escaped to the street. This system of high arches saved workers from immediate suffocation during intense cooking. Massive brick chimneys played a key role in the system of constant airflow from the premises. Wide pipes created a powerful natural draft, drawing all the smoke from burning coal into themselves. The force of this draft was so great that it could easily capture some of the steam from the boiling boilers standing nearby. The design of the chimneys was calculated with mathematical precision to avoid the reverse draft effect in strong winds. These giant brick columns pierced the entire building, rising above the roof of the mansion. The accumulation of thick grease and soot on the inner walls of these ventilation pipes posed a huge danger. The sticky coating could easily ignite from an accidental spark, causing a large-scale fire throughout the entire huge building. Therefore, the chimneys required regular and very thorough cleaning with special long brushes. This process was incredibly dirty and always resulted in clouds of black soot settling on the stone floor. The safety of the entire air system depended on the quality of this unpleasant but necessary daily routine. Fresh air was supplied through a system of special ventilation grills in the mansion's foundation. Cold air from the street was drawn into the basement, replacing the hot, polluted air rising upwards. This created a constant draft at floor level, which greatly cooled the feet of the people working there. Architects had to strike a delicate balance between the need for ventilation and maintaining an acceptable temperature. Airflow engineering was a true art form that required a deep understanding of the laws of physics. Particular attention was paid to the direction of the prevailing winds when initially designing the estate on the site. The kitchen wing was always placed on the leeward side of the main living quarters. The wind was supposed to carry all the smells and smoke from the chimneys far away to the endless forests or fields. A mistake in the location of the building could result in smoke constantly blowing directly into the open windows of the bedrooms. The landscape and windrows were studied long before the first stone was laid in the foundation of the future house. The principle of pressure difference was used to prevent kitchen air from entering the corridors. Doors to the work area were designed to open with considerable effort against the airflow. The draft in the huge chimneys created an area of slightly reduced pressure in the kitchen itself. Thanks to this, when the doors were opened, air from the corridors was drawn into the kitchen, and not vice versa. This invisible air wall worked much more effectively than any wooden partitions or thick fabrics. The air purification systems of that time were completely devoid of any mechanical fans or filters. All engineering solutions relied solely on the use of natural forces and the correct geometry of the space. This required architects to be phenomenally accurate in calculating the cross-sectional area of all air ducts. The slightest error could upset the delicate balance of draft and turn the work area into an unbearable gas chamber. Successful ventilation projects became models to be emulated and were studied in detail by architecture students. The ventilation of huge underground spaces was a real triumph of engineering thought in the Victorian architectural school. They were able to tame the air currents and make them serve the purposes of absolute comfort for the owners of the house. The complex geometry of high arches, narrow windows, and wide chimneys worked as a single, well-coordinated mechanism. This invisible air exchange system remained hidden from view, but determined the quality of life for all inhabitants. The art of air management became an integral part of creating the perfect isolation of two worlds.
Quickly now, take this down before it cools.
The problem of keeping cooked food warm during its long journey to the table was a real challenge. Traveling dozens of meters through cold stone corridors inevitably led to the food cooling down quickly. Architects created distances, and engineers and tableware craftsmen had to figure out how to overcome this obstacle. The main weapon in the fight against heat loss was massive silver and copper serving covers. These heavy domes tightly covered the plates, creating a closed space of hot air inside. The metal cloches were polished to a mirror, shine not only for their incredible visual aesthetics. The shiny inner surface perfectly reflected the heat radiation back onto the hot piece of meat. The massiveness of the metal allowed it to retain heat for a long time, acting as a kind of portable radiator. Removing these covers in the dining room was accompanied by the release of fragrant steam, creating a real theatrical effect. It was a spectacular sight, demonstrating the wealth of the hosts and the highest level of table service. Special metal trays with double bottoms and hidden reservoirs were used for additional heating. Before serving, boiling water was poured into these empty reservoirs directly from huge kitchen boilers. The food was placed on the upper plate of the tray and constantly heated from below by this hot water bath. This design made the already massive dishes even heavier, requiring great physical strength from the footmen. Carrying such water trays over long distances was a real test of endurance. In the dining room or buffet room itself, elegant alcohol burners were installed to maintain the final temperature. These small sources of open flame allowed sauces and soups to be heated immediately before being poured into bowls. The silver grates over the blue flames of the burners looked very aesthetic and did not spoil the interior of the banquet hall. This was the last line of defense against the cold air, ensuring the perfect serving temperature for the dishes. Refueling and cleaning these small burners was an important part of the daily duties of the junior footman. The speed at which the servants moved through the corridors was a critical factor in the success of the entire grand dining event. The footmen literally ran through the dark underground passages, trying to deliver the trays upstairs as quickly as possible. This frantic race required incredible coordination to avoid slipping on the smooth stone slabs. A collision between two servants in a narrow passageway with hot soup tureens in their hands was considered a real disaster. Training in fast and safe movement was conducted regularly and very strictly by the senior butlers. The process of serving food often resembled a well-coordinated sports relay race with the passing of an important baton. The assistant cooks carried heavy trays to the doors, where they were quickly intercepted by the footmen. The food was then rapidly lifted by elevator to the buffet room, where it was received by senior waiters in tailcoats. Each stage was timed to the second to minimize the time the plates spent in the open cold air. This logistical chain worked flawlessly thanks to strict discipline and repeated rehearsals. The final stage of food preparation took place in the buffet room before the dishes made their grand entrance into the dining room. Here, the transport covers were removed, and any accidental drops of sauce were wiped from the edges of the expensive porcelain. The dishes were decorated with fresh herbs and given their final, perfect aesthetic appearance. Only after this thorough inspection did the head butler give the signal to open the massive doors to the dining room. This intermediate stop ensured impeccable quality of service, despite the long journey from the basement. A huge number of staff were absolutely necessary to maintain such a complex delivery system. Several dozen servants could be involved in a single large dinner party, forming a continuous human chain. Every piece of hot meat on the Lord's table was the result of a victory over distance and the laws of thermodynamics. This system was impractical from a modern point of view, but it perfectly met the social demands of the era. The logistical masterpiece of dinner service will forever remain a symbol of Victorian grandeur and hidden labor.
Here, here.
The atmosphere of the formal dining room was the absolute incredible opposite of the working kitchen. Here, perfect order reigned, with subdued candlelight and impeccable, mathematically precise symmetry. Long wooden tables made of polished mahogany reflected the glare of crystal glasses and silver cutlery. Not a single detail of the interior reminded one of the hard physical labor that was going on far below, under the floor. The space was created exclusively for the leisurely enjoyment of food, intellectual conversation, and the display of status.
This claret is exquisite, Lord.
The guests at the table engaged in quiet, polite conversation, dressed in expensive silk dresses and formal evening tailcoats. The clink of fine crystal and the quiet tapping of silver forks were the only sounds accompanying the meal. Servants in snow-white gloves moved across the soft carpets absolutely silently, like gliding shadows.
Quite a triumph for the chef.
Any sudden movement or loud noise from the serving staff was considered completely unacceptable. This silence emphasized the exclusivity of the moment and the high social distance between the people gathered. The absence of fuss was the main rule for any traditional Victorian formal dinner. The dishes followed one another smoothly and measuredly, as if obeying the invisible conductor of this gastronomic orchestra. Guests never saw dirty dishes, which instantly disappeared behind the hidden doors of the bright pantry. The illusion that food appeared by itself without any effort was maintained throughout the evening. This theatrical performance required a tremendous amount of hidden work, the results of which looked incredibly easy. The cleanliness of the dining room was maintained at a high aesthetic level unattainable for kitchen facilities. Snow-white starched tablecloths were changed at the slightest sign of dirt, shining with impeccable freshness in the light of the candelabra. The finest porcelain had not a single crack or speck of soot on its perfect glaze. This sparkling world contrasted sharply with the sooty boilers and black coal dust of the workers' basements. Two spaces of the same house existed in parallel realities, connected only by narrow, dark corridors. This contrast was the quintessence of the entire Victorian lifestyle, with its strict rules and conventions. The pursuit of external perfection concealed the complex and difficult mechanism of real-life support. The beautiful picture of the formal dining room would have been impossible without the dark basements filled with heat and soot. Understanding this duality gives us the key to unraveling the psychology of society during that amazing historical period. Luxury was always paid for by the hard, invisible labor of the people left behind the sturdy green doors. The decline of the Victorian era brought fundamental changes to society and approaches to building houses. The economic situation began to change rapidly, making the maintenance of a large staff of servants too expensive a luxury.
Changes are inevitable, although regrettable.
The cheap labor that had sustained the complex logistics of the old estates began to disappear. People preferred to go to factories with regulated working hours, refusing to live in dark basements. This forced architects to radically rethink their views on the organization of living and working spaces. New technologies became the main driver of change in the design of comfortable urban and suburban buildings. The advent of gas stoves permanently rid workplaces of acrid coal dust and heavy black smoke. Gas flames were easy to control and did not require the constant carrying of heavy buckets of fuel and ash. The heat level in the room dropped sharply, making it much more comfortable to be near the stove. The need for huge ventilation shafts and high-vaulted ceilings gradually began to disappear. The introduction of electricity completely changed the rules of the game in architecture and domestic services. The appearance of the first electric hoods made it possible to effectively remove food odors without creating complex drafts. Electric lighting made work areas brighter and more pleasant for people to spend long periods of time in. Refrigeration units replaced damp ice houses, freeing staff from the need to carry huge blocks of ice. Technical progress made it possible to reduce the distance between areas without compromising air quality in reception rooms. The size of new houses being built became significantly more modest compared to the grandiose Victorian palaces. Long winding corridors gave way to more rational and compact layout solutions. Kitchens gradually began to move up from dark basements to the first floor, closer to the main dining room. Homeowners began to value functionality and convenience over demonstrating status through huge empty spaces. The reduction in distances made it possible to serve food piping hot without the use of cumbersome heating systems.
Perfectly, Thomas. The stew is quite hearty this evening.
Social norms also underwent significant and irreversible changes at the beginning of the 20th century. Housewives began to visit the work areas more often to supervise the preparation of complex dishes. The dark shafts of manual lifts inspire awe at the ingenuity and perseverance of engineers of the past. These buildings serve as a vivid lesson in how much architecture depends on social norms and the level of technology. The era of labyrinths has ended, leaving us with fascinating stories about man's attempts to hide reality behind green cloth. Victorian architecture has left us with an amazing legacy of complex and contradictory spatial solutions. The vast physical distances between the cooking area and the dining table are now a thing of the distant past. Today, we enjoy open, modern layouts and boldly combine relaxation areas with cooking spaces. Do you agree with the modern approach, or would you prefer to completely hide the cooking process from your guests? Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new exciting historical and architectural investigations.